Good afternoon, everyone. This is Amanda Harper. Today we have another of our information sessions. This one is titled Tips for Providers to Foster Communication and Collaboration with the Care Manager and Care Planning Team. Today's session will be recorded and posted to our website in about a week. Please note that we will have our next quarterly Care Managers Conference on March 11th from 9:30 to 12:30. The registration for that is available through SLMS, and the topics and materials will be announced through the advisory before the conference. As I said, today's conference will be available, or today's information session will be available on our website in about a week, and we will have a survey at the conclusion of today's presentation and ask that people please provide us with some feedback on this session and on any other topics or areas of need that would be helpful in supporting your job functions for OPWDD to present on, and that will pop up in your browser at the end. Today we have Mary Ellen Mosier with us, who will be presenting on the topic, and will allow time for questions at the conclusion of her presentation that we'll review through the Q&A and answer as time allows. All right, so thank you very much. I'm going to turn it over to Mary Ellen.
Thanks, Amanda. Good afternoon, everyone. I am presenting to you today on tips for providers to foster communication and collaboration with the care manager and care planning team. We did do a similar session back at the December 11, 2019 Care Manager Quarterly Conference, and that session was titled Tips for CCOs and Care Managers to Foster Communication and Collaboration with the Care Planning Team. So this is part 2 for providers from the provider perspective, and it is part 2 of what we previously presented on. You can find that information on the SLMS system. So before we get into the meat of our tips that we want to share with you, we thought it would be helpful just to come back to the life planning process cycle through this visual. It's always helpful for us to think of the life planning process cycle as one of continuity. It's ongoing. It's a continuous quality improvement, starting with the assessment process through the CAS, the DDP2, the IM tool, any other person-centered planning tools that are being used to assess the person's needs and goals and what outcomes they want from their life. The life plan is the overarching blueprint for the person. It represents the overarching outcomes and goals for the person and their overarching safeguards. And what's most important to that person should be reflected in that life plan. And of course, the staff action plan fills in the details and describes how habilitation staff will deliver the supports and services that are required to meet the person's goals stemming from their life plan. It's a collaborative, team-driven process, driven by the person to the maximum extent that the person wants to drive the process and is able to drive the process. Collaboration is what we are emphasizing throughout this session today. A successful life planning process takes the input and collaboration and communication of all of the various parties on the care planning team to have a successful life plan for the person that represents what's most important to them. There's different roles on the care planning team, but it does take everyone involved doing their part to have a successful life plan meeting and life planning process for the person. The care manager is usually the facilitator of this process, although that doesn't always have to be the case. If the care manager designates someone else to be the facilitator, that's okay, as long as there is alignment between the role of the care manager and what the facilitator is doing on the care manager's behalf. So you have a facilitator, and a good facilitator will usually ensure that many things that have to happen are done prior to the actual life plan meeting, and we'll talk about that in a little more detail as we move through the tips that we want to share with you. I'd like to point out that you do have some reference materials. We did do a separate reference material attachment so that we didn't have a really long PowerPoint for you, but you'll want to check out the tips for being a good facilitator, because part of that is really building relationships with members of the circle of support so that everyone can participate and work with the person on their plan on an ongoing basis. So the first tip that we want to emphasize is timely communication. We basically talked at length with the care managers at the quarterly conference about the need to have timely communication with providers and the rest of the care planning team to ensure that life plan meetings are scheduled well in advance and that everyone is aware and is able to participate in that life plan meeting. And of course, the ultimate meeting date and time should be at times and locations that are convenient to the person, not the convenience of the staff, the care manager or providers, but really revolving around the convenience of the person. And the care manager also ensures that all of the major service providers and others that the individual wants involved in that meeting can make the meeting. So that's the role of the care manager with timely communication. On the provider's end, you want to respond to care managers timely when they reach out regarding those life plan meetings and that scheduling, and be flexible and aware that life plan meetings and reviews will be at times and locations that are convenient for the person, and be flexible in that regard. And just to mention before we get into tip 2 that sometimes CCOs will have a standard operating procedure in place that outlines the CCO's expectation for how care managers are to communicate timely with the care planning team around life plan meetings. So that may be something that the care manager is required to follow that's unique to the CCOs, but we usually recommend that best practice, the care manager is lining up those meetings at least 3 weeks in advance so that folks can make sure who are involved in that process that there's enough pre-planning time before you actually get to the life plan meeting. So tip number 2 is emphasizing the importance of planning and organizing in advance of the life plan meeting. So the ultimate goal is to ensure that when people come together to that meeting, that there can be a real focus on the person and what's most important to the person for their quality of life and what's most important to that person for their goals and outcomes. So we want to try to plan and organize in advance and address all of the information sharing and all of the technical details and all of that technical information before the actual life plan meeting so that we can ensure that that meeting is focused in a person-centered way on the person. So communicating and collaborating before the life plan meeting is an expectation. Sharing any information and technical details back and forth before the meeting, addressing any paperwork and requirements before the life plan meeting, all of that is going to help ensure a focus on the person during the actual person-centered planning meeting. So the care manager is expected to help guide provider staff and other circles of support members for what they need to be thinking about before the meeting. The care manager would specify the information that should be prepared before the meeting and sent to the care manager. communicating on any processes that the CCOs would follow for dispute resolution or disagreements should be done before the meeting. And best practice is to provide a draft life plan as a starting point to providers and others so that providers can ensure that the technical details that are needed for billing are there, and the life plan meeting itself doesn't have to focus on these technical details. So provider staff supports the care manager and the care planning team by forwarding the staff action plan and any other information needed, and reviewing the draft life plan and communicating with the care manager prior to the actual meeting on any technical issues and changes that are needed, again, so that the life plan meeting itself can be person-centered and focused on the person. So the informational memo that was just issued on January 14th of 2020, that information memo's purpose was to clarify these expectations and requirements. These are not new requirements, but we found that there was a need to actually clarify the information sharing responsibilities of providers and care managers and the team to ensure that sharing this information is done in a timely way, and that there is full support for an accurate life plan to be produced. So what does this information memo say? It lays out the responsibilities for the care manager to ensure that all relevant and pertinent information is gathered from habilitation providers and others and reviewed prior to the life plan meeting to inform that life plan. So the information that HAB providers are required to share in advance of the meeting, if at all possible, but no later than the actual life plan meeting, is any medical and health status information that you have about the person. We know that, habilitation providers are often in contact with the person on a day-to-day basis and will know before the care manager if there's any clinical, medical, or health conditions that need to be communicated. And the expectation is that that information is communicated timely. The plan of nursing services, behavioral support plans, any medication updates and changes, habilitation needs and safeguards, staff action plans, and any other information that the habilitation providers or other providers have about the person should be shared in advance of that life plan meeting so that the care manager can formulate a draft of the life plan as a starting point. And again, this is all part of that pre-planning to take care of all of these things before the actual life plan meeting, because the ultimate goal is to have a person-centered meeting with the person driving their meeting and driving the information that they want to be focused on. Okay, so tip number 3, this goes along with pre-planning, but it's about person-centered preparation, because the life plan meeting is not about the paperwork, it's about the person's life. So best practice is that the care manager prepare an outline of the meeting in conjunction with the person if he or she desires and wants to be part of the pre-planning part of the meeting. Successful person-centered planning meetings include talking to all involved before the actual meeting to clarify expectations and desires. In your reference materials, you will find a draft of a person-centered life plan meeting, an example outline. This is just an example of how a meeting might flow. Again, CCOs may have standard operating procedures in place for care managers that talk about how they want the meetings to flow. So this is just an example. But, making sure that everyone knows prior to the meeting, what the ultimate purpose of that meeting is, whether it's a life plan meeting or a semi-annual review, and making sure that the person can get out prior to the meeting what they want to accomplish. that's really the job of the care manager as facilitator, or whoever that facilitator is going to be if the care manager is delegating that to another facilitator. Care managers and providers are both responsible for making sure that they prepare discussion questions about service delivery and progress towards goals prior to the meeting. So we're really emphasizing the need to prepare and communicate and collaborate prior to the actual meeting. So I'm not sure how much of that is really going on at this point, but it's so important to prepare prior to getting to that table, because the focus needs to be on the person, not the paperwork, not the technical billing details. It really should be about the person's quality of life and what is going on in terms of service delivery, what's the person struggling with that the team can help them, you know, in terms of meeting their goals. So tip number 3, person-centered preparation. Although the focus of this session is on the life plan process, since we have providers that this session is geared to, we want to point out that most of what we're talking about here today is also relevant to the person-centered planning process involving the staff action plan. As you know, as providers, OPWDD requires a person-centered process to occur in all aspects of the person's services and service planning. So things that we're talking about on this slide, focusing on the whole person and what is important to him or her, can also be emphasized when you're looking at reviewing the staff action plan. And this material comes from a document back in 2001, an oldie, but it's still a goodie, Increasing Person-Centered Thinking and Improving the Quality of Person-Centered Planning. But these are really the key areas that, you know, can help enhance a person's quality of life. Their community presence, how can we help increase the person's presence in local community life? Friends and relationships, how can we help the person expand and deepen his or her friendships and other important relationships? Promoting informed choice of the person, ultimate choice and control for the person's life. Enhancing the person's skills and contribution. Experiential learning, how do we help the person find new possibilities and desirable experiences? And really emphasizing the person's dreams, desires, and meaningful experiences when we talk about person-centered planning and service delivery. This is really what it's all about. This is the crux of person-centeredness. So tip number 4 is about fostering teamwork and collaboration. And again, this is what we're emphasizing throughout the process. It takes everybody coming to the table with their best stuff to make a person-centered plan work for the person. So everyone involved is going to be fostering teamwork and collaboration, listening and showing respect for each other, cooperating and supporting each other, stimulating creative thinking. Sometimes tools like posters, you know, really help in the person-centered planning process, and other tools that can help promote new ideas and solutions. There's a ton of stuff out there that can be helpful to the process. Tolerance for disagreement with an emphasis on resolution, and use of consensus building strategies when needed. In your reference materials, we have some tips for consensus building. It's really important when you're facilitating a meeting to try to build consensus through active listening, summarizing and synthesizing what you are hearing. Building consensus by using some communication techniques, like we all seem to agree that this is happening, but we seem to disagree about X, and kind of clarifying and summarizing and synthesizing what is being said during that meeting. So there's some good tips in that reference materials that may be helpful to you in fostering teamwork and collaboration. So tip number 5 is making sure that all members of the care planning team leave the meeting with a common understanding. So again, everybody involved in that plan meeting has a role in making sure that they're leaving the meeting with what they need to do their jobs. But the care manager as facilitator, whoever the facilitator is, should be summarizing the meeting, should be summarizing what the goals are and the provider assigned goals and supports and who they're being assigned to, summarizing any areas of disagreement that have not been able to be resolved during the meeting, and just a reminder that those should be in the IDT meeting summary of the finalized life plan, and we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. But providers should also ensure that you have a clear understanding of the goals and supports that are being assigned to you through this process before you leave the meeting, and helping to define the service delivery strategies and discussing the service delivery strategies that you will be depicting in the staff action plan is also very helpful. So just making sure that, you know, the team is coming together at the end of the meeting and saying, okay, we agreed with X, Y, and Z, and these are the provider assigned goals and supports. We seem to have a disagreement about X, making sure everybody's on the same page before the end of the meeting. So tip number 6 is to be familiar with the life plan dispute resolution process. There should be no life plan that is being held up because there is a disagreement, because we have put a path forward in how to move through a process towards resolution of any disagreements so that life plans are not held up. This process is outlined in ADM number 2018-06, the revised version, which was reissued on May 9th of 2019 and is on our website. So how does this dispute resolution process work? Basically, a disagreement is going to be identified either prior to the life plan meeting or during that life plan meeting. And the team is going to try to work through and build consensus during that meeting. But if resolution is not reached during that person-centered planning process, the CCO would implement its own internal dispute resolution process. Every CCO is required to have a process that usually involves a chain of command within the CCO all the way up to, you know, a leadership level person if need be. So if that dispute cannot be resolved through that dispute resolution process in the CCO, then the next step would be to involve the Developmental Disabilities Regional Office for assistance. Every DDRO has a care coordination support liaison. Those telephone numbers and contact information are on OPWD's website. So if the DDRO cannot assist and there's still a disagreement at the time the life plan needs to be finalized, and the life plan has to be finalized within that 45-day time frame from the life plan meeting. So if you get to that time frame and there's still a disagreement, then what happens is if the dispute or the area of disagreement is a new goal, support, or safeguard that has not previously been in an ISP or life plan, then that area is summarized in the IDT summary of the life plan, and it does not go in section 2 or 3 as a goal or support for the person. However, if the disputed element is associated with an already approved ISP or life plan, then that goal or support should remain in section 2 or 3 of the life plan, and the disagreement still gets described in the IDT summary of the life plan, but since it was already something that was expected to happen and should be going on now and should be being addressed by providers through service delivery, that goes in the actual life plan framework. So within 45 days, the care manager and the individual or his or her representative sign the life plan. Then the life plan is considered final. Even if there is still disagreement, those disputed elements remain in the summary of the IDT section of the life plan, and the remainder of the life plan is ready for implementation. If that was a new goal or support that's not in section 2 and 3. If it's not a new goal or support, then it should continue to be implemented by the provider or whoever is implementing. So providers then agree and acknowledge to deliver the provider-assigned goals and supports associated with their services in sections 2 or 3. This acknowledgement and agreement may be done via signature, email, or other method agreed upon between the care manager and the service provider. Staff action plans are developed and signed by habilitation staff and forwarded to the care manager based on the agreed upon mechanism for prompt communication. The staff action plan should also be provided to the individual and his or her representative and any parties agreed to by the person with his or her representative. Once the life plan and the corresponding staff action plan are finalized, if there's still a disagreement and no agreement has been reached, then any party, the individual, his or her representative, or a provider can initiate a due process proceeding pursuant to OPWDD 633.12 regulations, and this is as an objection to a plan of services. Now, this is new for providers because in the past it was only for individuals to use this due process mechanism to object to their plan of services. But now if a provider disagrees with what's in the life plan, the provider can initiate an objection to that plan of services. And during the due process proceeding, all other elements in the finalized life plan and staff action plan gets implemented. So in summary, as far as this dispute resolution process, there should be no life plans that are held up for a disagreement because there is a process and a path in place to ensure the life plan can be finalized. So we're going to move on to tip number 7. So this tip recommends that life plan updates and changes, any changes made to a life plan or a staff action plan that's being distributed, that when you go to distribute this as a care manager or provider, just attach a short email or note that highlights what has changed so that any member of the care planning team can quickly look at the document and say, okay, this is a change, so that they don't have to spend unnecessary time comparing prior versions of plans. So tip number 8 is about thinking about integrating important aspects of the staff action plan review as part of the life plan meetings and reviews. So the staff action plan ADM already requires that at least one staff action plan review be coordinated with the life plan. So why not think about coordinating the staff action plan review as part of the life plan meetings and reviews on an ongoing basis? And this way everyone on the care planning team is getting the most comprehensive information. And during that review, you're hopefully familiar with the requirements, but the accomplishments of the person should be looked at as part of the individual's progress, their progress towards accomplishments and prevention of regression since the last meeting. That staff action plan review should look at the services and supports that have been provided and what challenges have been experienced and what new strategies or methodologies may need to be implemented. So having this dialogue with the whole care planning team and having everyone involved in discussing strategies and methodologies will be to the ultimate benefit of the person. So it really is a best practice to think about integrating with a life plan. So tip number 9 is about timely distribution of that life plan and that staff action plan. Care managers need to ensure that a timely copy of a finalized life plan is provided to providers. And we've been hearing a lot of feedback that sometimes providers are getting a life plan, but they don't always know it's the finalized life plan because the signatures aren't included in the finalized life plan. So from the care manager's role is to make sure providers are getting a finalized life plan in a timely way. The provider's role is to make sure the care manager is getting the staff action plan within the 60-day time frame and ensuring that that's distributed timely. So tip number 10, it is a best practice for providers to develop a standard operating procedure for the staff that are responsible for participating in life plan meetings. So CCOs are required to have standard operating procedures for many of the things that are being done as part of the care management process. So as a provider, why not develop standard operating procedures for your staff to make sure that they have clarity around the information that should be gathered and sent to the care manager beforehand? What staff should make sure they know before leaving the life plan meeting? What information should be brought back to supervisors? What to do if there's a disagreement, or what can the habilitation staff sign off on and agree to during the life plan process? And what needs to be brought back through the chain of command? That seems to be a difficult area now. So making sure there's a standard operating procedure in place that directs provider staff on these points would be very helpful to the whole process. So tip number 11 is evaluating the process. After that life plan meeting or that last life plan review, having that communication and collaboration again with the team. How did things go? How could we make improvements for next time? That's part of the continuous quality improvement cycle and getting better and better at reflecting person-centeredness. So going along with tip number 11, evaluating for continuous quality improvement, some questions to ask about the process. Did the dreams and desires of the individual form the foundation for the process? Did we really focus on what's important to the person, what's meaningful to them during the meeting? Did we identify and build on the person's gifts and talents? Did we discuss the individual's ideals, what they want for their home, work, relationships, community life, self-determination, their choices? Were team strategies devised to help the person overcome any challenges and obstacles in their life? Did the individual drive and participate in the process to the extent desired and able? These are some indicators of, how person-centered was your person-centered planning meeting and process. So lastly, remembering that communication and collaboration is really essential to person-centered planning. Information sharing for effective participation and focus on the person, all of that pre-planning, if that is all done ahead of time and addressing any technical things ahead of time, again, will ensure that that meeting is productive for the person and that it's a good meeting for the person. Establishing cooperative, ongoing, and collaborative relationships with the team. Very important to have build those relationships and be able to work through to consensus. Establishing and developing timely and effective communication strategies. It's really all about partnership. And doing this will ensure meaningful outcomes for the person during the process. So thank you so much. We are going to look at what questions have come in and put you on hold while we gather our thoughts to answer questions.
And if people just want to take a moment to see if you have additional questions, that a lot of the comments that have been raised have been spoken to throughout the presentation, so we'll give people a couple of minutes to see if you have any technical questions from what's been presented today.
Okay. We're back. Sorry about that. We're getting a lot of different questions in, so we're going to do a couple. There was a question about the provider's responsibility to distribute the staff action plan. There is information in the ADM on the staff action plan. It's 2018 ADM 09-R that does require the provider to distribute the staff action plan. It's a billing standard to distribute it to the care manager no later than 60 days after the start of the HAB service, the life plan review date, or the development of a revised updated staff action plan, whichever comes first. And it also is required that the person get a copy of their staff action plan, and anyone else that the person wants to have a copy of that staff action plan. So that's really what you're required to do as a provider in distributing the staff action plan. We also got a comment, I'm not sure if it was a question, but a comment about it seems that the care managers are required to have multiple life plan meetings. Just in speaking to this, that's not the intent here. The intent is that the care manager is collaborating and communicating with the team on an ongoing basis, and that's part of person-centeredness. You don't want everyone to just show up to the life plan meeting and start from scratch. There should be ongoing care management happening, and as part of that ongoing care management, there should be a dialogue, with the person, for example. Your annual life plan meeting is coming up. It's a good time, to look at, what's going on in your life and what changes you might want to make. Let's talk about an outline together, like what you want to accomplish, so we make sure we get that information out. The care manager, as part of care management, should be contacting providers on a regular basis to see how the person's doing in services. Monitoring service delivery and what's going on for the person in that regard is also the job of a care manager. So, what this presentation is about is talking about doing the pre-planning and organizing before the actual life plan meeting, but really it's part of the day-to-day job of the care manager to have this communication and collaboration happening. Now, the provider's responsibility from the provider perspective is to make sure there is timely communication whenever there is a change that is going on with the person. The provider is usually seeing the person on a day-to-day basis and will know if the person's been hospitalized, will know if there's a serious medical condition, will know if something's going on clinically with the person. And the provider's job is to communicate that to the care manager. When we recently did some post-implementation reviews of the CCOs, we found that sometimes the care managers weren't aware of a hospitalization for somebody that was in like a certified residential setting, for example. It's the job of the provider to pick up the phone and call the care manager if somebody's hospitalized. There's other ways eventually that care managers will get this information through RIO alerts and technology. But that communication and collaboration can also build those positive relationships and that trust among the care planning team. And if there's communication, collaboration, and trust amongst the care planning team, the services at the end of the day are going to be better and of higher quality for the person. And that's what we're all here to deliver, is high quality services to the person.
Absolutely. There was another question and some comments just about the distribution of the life plan. So you had touched on this, Mary Ellen, but of just emphasizing that the life plan should be finalized within 45 days of the life plan meeting, and that the care manager is required to distribute that finalized plan to the person and the providers for acknowledgement and agreement. So the providers should be receiving that life plan following, at least following that 45-day window and following up if they're not. But as you're saying, through that collaborative process, really establishing how the communication with a draft life plan and with the finalized life plan, of discussing those timeframes and how that's going to be done, and making sure that's agreed to, so that a month or two after the meeting you're not looking for that plan because you've had that conversation up front about how and when you're going to be receiving those documents.
Mm-hmm. And, you know, if all else fails, because we understand that there are still some challenges that providers are having in getting finalized life plans and life plans that you have, you can see clearly that there's a signature of a care manager and the individual or the individual's representative, you know, then, you know, really document those attempts to get, you know, the finalized life plan and go through the CCO chain of command if you are unable to resolve it with the care manager and the supervisor level. There's some questions about signatures on life plans for people who have no legal guardian or representative. And OPWDD is aware that there are a number of life plans that remain unsigned for this reason. And so it's really important that the care managers are documenting why a life plan isn't signed, and that the provider also has documentation of that reason. And OPWD is working with the CCOs on this topic and internally within OPWDD on how we can resolve that issue. Sometimes there is a legal guardian and the care manager has not been successful in getting that legal guardian to sign the life plan, so that's another reason why a life plan may not be finalized. You know, in those situations, again, we want to emphasize that in the ADM 2018-06R, the Transition to Care Coordination, if a life plan is not finalized, the services do not expire. The services continue to be in effect based on the ISP. So we're sort of in a holding pattern right now on some of those life plans that have not been able to be finalized, but there is coverage from that ADM that services do not expire. Okay, everyone, we're going to answer one more question. There's a question about what happens with the staff action plan distribution if there is no finalized life plan. So the time frame to have a staff action plan done, according to the ADM, is 60 days after the life plan meeting. Within that 60-day time frame, a staff action plan has to be done and distributed to the care manager. So the question is, if you have no finalized life plan, are you still required to meet that 60-day time frame? And the answer is yes. And the way that you do that with no finalized life plan is you make sure during the life plan meeting that you have a clear understanding of those provider assigned goals that are going to be assigned to you. And you can pick up the phone and call the care manager and say, you know, I'm trying to get this staff action plan done. What does the draft life plan say if you don't have a copy of the draft life plan? And then, you know, if all else fails, do the best that you can based on the information that you have to mirror the provider assigned goal, and make a note that there's no finalized life plan and that the provider assigned goal would have to be clarified once a life plan is finalized. So when in doubt, document, document, document.
Great, thank you very much, Mary Ellen. So as we said, there's going to be a survey at the conclusion of today's information session, so please provide us with feedback and with any other topics or information that would be helpful. We really appreciate everyone's participation today. We had a great number of attendees and a lot of helpful information. The questions and comments that come in, we do review them after to inform future presentations and future guidance, so we really appreciate everyone's participation today and the feedback that you've given through the Q&A. So we hope this has been helpful. We've had a couple of comments to come through to say that it has, and thank you very much. Have a great afternoon.